The room went completely silent when the CEO looked at the single father's outstretched hand and simply turned away. It was supposed to be the most important handshake of the man's life, the moment that would decide whether his struggling company survived or disappeared. Instead, in front of investors, executives, and the entire board, he was treated like he didn't belong there. Nobody knew that within 24 hours, that same man would become the only person capable of saving the company. And nobody expected what he would do after finally getting the power to destroy the man who had humiliated him. If you believe kindness, second chances, and treating people with dignity can change lives, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel, because this story is about to show you why character matters more than status. His name was Daniel Carter, a 42-year-old single father who had spent the last 6 years building a small technology company from a rented office above an old mechanic's garage. Daniel had never come from money. His wife had died unexpectedly years earlier, leaving him to raise their 8-year-old daughter, Emma, while trying to keep his business alive. Every morning began before sunrise. He packed Emma's lunch, checked her homework, made sure she had clean clothes, and then drove her to school before heading to the office. His employees sometimes joked that Daniel ran 2 companies, the one that paid the bills and the one that came home with him every night. But beneath the exhaustion was something stronger. Daniel refused to give up. His company had created a revolutionary logistics platform that could help major manufacturers reduce waste, fuel consumption, and delivery delays. The technology worked, but scaling it required enormous capital. For 2 years, Daniel had approached investors and heard the same words: too risky, too small, too inexperienced. Then, finally, everything changed when a global investment group offered to consider a $200 million funding package. It was the opportunity Daniel had dreamed about, but there was one condition. The final meeting would be held with Victor Hale, the celebrated CEO of the investment group, a man known throughout the business world for his cold personality and ruthless negotiations. Daniel arrived at the glass tower wearing the best navy suit he owned. It wasn't new. He had borrowed money from his own company's emergency account to have it professionally tailored. Before entering the conference room, he looked at a small photograph of Emma inside his wallet. She was standing beside him at a school science fair, smiling proudly beside a cardboard model of a rocket. Daniel touched the photograph for a second and whispered that he was doing this for her. Then he walked into the room. Victor Hale sat at the center of the long conference table, surrounded by lawyers, executives, and investors. He was everything Daniel had expected: expensive suit, perfect posture, expressionless face. Daniel introduced himself and stepped forward with his hand extended. For a brief moment, Victor looked at it. Then his eyes moved toward Daniel's worn shoes, his modest watch, and the slightly faded briefcase he carried. Victor leaned back and ignored the handshake completely. He told Daniel to sit down. A few people around the table exchanged uncomfortable glances. Daniel felt his face grow hot, but he swallowed his pride and sat down. He reminded himself why he was there. He wasn't looking for respect from Victor. He was fighting for his employees, for his daughter, and for the dream he had built from nothing. The meeting began, and Daniel presented the technology with remarkable confidence. He showed projections, manufacturing partnerships, cost reductions, and proof that his system had already been tested successfully. For the first time, even Victor looked interested. Then came the moment Daniel had been waiting for. The investment group's analysts confirmed that the company had enormous potential. $200 million could be released within weeks. Daniel could hire hundreds of employees, expand internationally, and finally take the company beyond survival mode. But Victor still wasn't satisfied. He questioned Daniel's leadership experience and suggested that a larger corporation should acquire the company instead. Daniel politely refused. He wanted his employees to remain part of the journey, and he wanted to preserve the company he had built. Victor smiled coldly and told him that ambition was admirable, but people like Daniel often confused courage with competence. The words hurt, but Daniel stayed calm. He thanked everyone for their time and left the room. What nobody knew was that another investor had been watching the entire meeting remotely. Her name was Margaret Ellis, one of the wealthiest and most respected investors in the industry. She had been following Daniel's company for months, but she had never spoken to him. After watching Victor dismiss him, she called her team and asked one question: how quickly could they prepare a $200 million offer? The answer came the next morning. By noon, Daniel received a call. Margaret Ellis was willing to fund the entire company without demanding control. But there was one unusual condition: Daniel had to remain CEO. She believed the man who had built the company while raising a child alone was exactly the kind of leader worth investing in. The news spread quickly. Within days, Daniel secured the funding Victor had rejected. The business world began talking about the small company that had suddenly received $200 million in backing. But while Daniel was celebrating with his employees, Victor's company began experiencing a nightmare. The investment group had quietly depended on Daniel's technology for several major projects. When Daniel refused to sell, those projects collapsed. Clients began pulling contracts. Shareholders panicked. Within weeks, the company Victor had controlled for years lost billions in market value. Employees were laid off. Offices emptied. The same people who had once laughed confidently around Victor now avoided his eyes. Then, one rainy afternoon, Victor received an unexpected invitation. Daniel wanted to meet. Victor arrived at a modest restaurant, expecting revenge. Instead, Daniel stood and offered his hand. For several seconds, Victor stared at it. This time, Daniel didn't pull it back. Victor finally shook his hand. Daniel told him that he remembered what happened in that conference room, but he also remembered what it felt like to struggle alone. He said he didn't want Victor to suffer because of one humiliating moment. He wanted him to understand something far more important: money could buy a building, a title, and even influence, but it could never buy character. Victor lowered his eyes. For the first time in years, the powerful CEO looked like an ordinary man carrying the weight of his mistakes. He apologized, not because his company had collapsed, but because he finally understood what he had done. Daniel could have walked away. Instead, he offered Victor a consulting position helping small entrepreneurs avoid the mistakes that had destroyed his own company. It was not a promotion. It was not revenge. It was a second chance. Months later, Daniel stood in front of his employees at the opening of a new headquarters. Emma was beside him, holding his hand. Hundreds of workers applauded as Daniel looked across the crowd. He remembered the tiny office above the mechanic's garage, the sleepless nights, the unpaid bills, the rejection letters, and that humiliating handshake. He realized then that the greatest victory had never been the $200 million. It was becoming successful without becoming cruel. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who needs a second chance, and subscribe for more YK stories about courage, kindness, and unexpected victories. And before the story ends, I want to ask you something special. Comment: kindness is stronger than pride, if you believe success means nothing when we forget how to treat people. Because sometimes, the person standing in front of you may look like someone who has nothing to offer. You may see an old briefcase, a tired face, or worn-out shoes. But you never know how much courage it took for that person to walk through the door. And sometimes, the hand you refuse to shake today could belong to the person who saves you tomorrow.